I've personally never been of the mind that, like, you should try to protect the children and not tell the jokes, you know what I mean? Like, it's always a better idea to push the boundary, see where art can take you, even if it involves risk. And that's one of the things that Bill Hicks has influenced. That's a direct thing I can point to Bill Hicks and say, like, oh, that's an influence his comedy has had on me, is that, like, there's not a subject that is not, that's something you can't joke about. There's ways to do it poorly. There's plenty of ways to fuck up an Amy Winehouse joke, you know what I mean? Like, or someone who just died, a sensitive subject, you know? But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try to do it, because you can still do it well. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And you can do a lot of good by doing that. And that, I think, is the role of the artist as comedian.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, because I did want to ask you about that, because it's mentioned in the movie, and that the idea of that early on Hicks understood the idea of the role that funny people have in society, you know,
Yeah.
which I think, you know, was best immortalized by Shakespeare's work of the fool. That the fool is the one that is allowed to say whatever he wants to the king, but it's always kind of like, oh, well, that's just the fool.
Right.
But the fool is the one who ends up saying the truth the most. And but anyway, that Hicks that one of the reasons why he wanted to be a comedian was that realizing that the comedian is a very special role in society.
Right.
And I'm wondering, you know, like what you've thought about that and how you see that in relation to Bill Hicks.
It's a hall pass when everyone else has to stay in the classroom, you know what I mean? Like, it lets you sort of, being a comedian, having that, like, you know, card-carrying comedian label, lets you sort of stand at the back of the room of society and sort of observe. And that's how you're participating, is by observing other people participating, and you're exploring the perimeter. You're seeing, if you imagine like everything that people know is like one big circle, right? Like a limited amount of space. It's the comedian's job, and for that matter, the philosopher's job and the PhD's job, to sort of poke like at the edge of that circle and like make a little bump, make a tiny little bit of it, like a little bit more that human beings understand, and then sort of everyone sort of has that responsibility, and gradually the amount of things we know gets larger, you know? And the comedian's job is to do that through exposing ridiculousness, you know? And that's what Bill Hicks did. He pointed out hypocrisy. Yeah, he was funny. He was an incisive comedian, but like, what was he incising? You know, he was incising these huge, like, societal, systemic problems that he thought were inhibiting literally every human being on the planet. He didn't look at it like this was just like an hour-long headlining set. Like, he looked at it like, he played 300 shows a year the last 2 years of his life, you know? He was, I think he called it like smashing his head against the walls, you know, of America to try to convince them of his perspective that he felt was underrepresented because of that same like boy band shit that was happening around the time.
The embrace,
you know?
of mediocrity, and being fed nice, safe things.
And the horrible new forms of propaganda that were happening at the time with the Gulf War. Like, that was the most you know, like, that was more televised than Vietnam. There was like fucking people standing rooting, you know, like, which now has turned into the shock and awe stuff, which is why, and even that's like old news already, you know?
Yeah,
like,
now people are like, oh, that's the televised war thing, you know?
Right, and that was new, and Bill Hicks, as an entertainer and as a self-marketer, was able to see through these messages and was able to see, like, no, their stated goal is trying to manipulate your opinion, is trying to change your view. That's what advertisers are doing. So that's why he would tell jokes like, you know, if you're in advertising or marketing, kill yourself, you know what I mean? Like, do us the karmic favor. Yeah. He was looking at it like the humanity has fucked up so badly that we just have not stopped fucking and creating shitty little people who just create more shitty little people who pollute everything and ruin everything and take from everyone else, and the problem is that we need to stop doing, like, that's sort of the model he comes from. When ultimately, individual humans, he still thought, were beautiful and worthwhile and part of something larger. So he was a complicated character who had a very deep, subtle understanding of reality, and that perspective informed his sense of humor as he was observing the society he was a part of.